many homosexuals successfully conceal their orientation, and because homosexuals are not identifiable on site unless they choose to be identifiable by their conduct, they just can't constitute a special class.
I actually have relived this part of the argument, and I want to do over, because I want to turn to the courtroom, and I want to ask all the cases. They were all around her. And I thought, that's not fair. I mean, we're still living under Bowers. Maybe just being identified is going to put them at risk. We had won zero protection for these people. When you lose a case of this consequence, when you leave a city this defenseless, when you leave people this lonely, it's hard not to personally.
I think this is good.
Invisibility.
Let's see, found export as
the LGBTQ community's invisibility comes from being forced to hide. They've had to live.
why is everything grayed out?
Being arrested,
Where's the
fired, ostracized from their family or work. And because they had to hide, society tells us they simply don't exist. Art by LGBTQ people is suppressed, they're quoted, their identities are erased from history. As LGBTQ poet and essayist Adrienne Rich says, when someone describes the world and you are not in it, there's a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked in a mirror and saw nothing. Whew. Can you imagine that? Well, the sad thing is, too many people.
You know, amazingly enough, Cincinnati really started to change in the early 2000s. Attitudes slowly but surely were improving towards the LGBTQ community. I think we were increasing our numbers of people who were progressive and looking to make Cincinnati a better place. But Phil and I, we were never what I would call activists. We didn't contribute to campaigns. We didn't campaign on anyone's behalf. We didn't do any of that. You know, in some ways, I think we were a little divorced from reality, and that we weren't as involved politically as perhaps we should have been. But in some ways, I think living openly as an open gay couple is really a political act. Just being you help people learn that. Oh, LGBTQ people really
no photo.
aren't that different than me. They were thought they were scary, horrible. Just living their lives. And while maybe two men, their life really isn't that much different from my life.
Some people feel like the LGBTQ movement happened fast, really fast. I get it. But whether some Americans realize it's not, it didn't just appear out of thin air. Decades of effort went into the LGBTQ movement. By the early 2000s, Americans were seeing more LGBTQ characters on TV. I'm gay. The news began to share LGBTQ stories in people's personal lives. Friends and family members started coming out. So someone says the LGBTQ movement happened too fast. Remember, for generations, LGBTQ activists have been fighting for recognition. And now we're all going free to their labor.
Lawrence v. Texas. Okay, so 86 Bowers versus Hardwick. Court says if the states want to criminalize same-sex sexual conduct, be my guest. So flash forward to
Lawrence versus Texas.
Okay, so we got that
In Lawrence, you had two
one.
adults who had been arrested and charged with a crime because in private, they were having sexual conduct. And the state of Texas said it did have the power to criminalize that.
The court in Lawrence is looking at a state statute, very similar to the one that was at issue in Powers versus Hartman. And the question for the court now is, does this statute violate the due process clause?
In 2003, the Supreme Court has 4 liberal justices and 5 conservative justices. Of one, Anthony Kennedy, he's the 14th just a little differently than his conservative peers. The petitioners are entitled to respect for their private lives. Their right to liberty under the Due Process Clause gives them the full right to engage in their conduct without intervention of the government.
Justice Kennedy, right before it says something really interesting like this, saying, we have to sort of pay attention to the dignity of the individual.
We conclude this case should be resolved by determining whether it is adults to engage in this private conduct in the exercise of their liberty. Process clause of the 14th Amendment.
The court said, you can't outlaw people's intimate lives just because you disapprove of them. You have to show that it's hurting society in some way. There's no evidence that it is. Gay people are just living like everybody else.
Our obligation is to define the liberty of all, not to mandate our own moral code. Ours was not correct when it was decided, and it's not correct today. It will not to remain binding precedent. Ours versus Hardwick should be, and now is, overruled.
This is one of those few times where the court actually overrides an earlier precedent to go the other way. And for the first time, the court says that actually the right to choose your own partner is one of those fundamental rights protected by the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment.
There was a Richard Reed were in the court.
Justice Scalia has filed a dissenting opinion.
Scalia read from the bench, which is something that justices do only when they're very, very unhappy with the results.
Many Americans do not want homosexuals to be partners in their business, scoutmasters for their children, or boarders in their home. They view this as protecting themselves and their families against a lifestyle they believe to be immoral and destructive.
So viewed is the court with the law profession's anti-homosexual culture.
But it is seemingly unaware that the attitudes of that culture are not obviously mainstream.
He says the court had been captured by elitists, it had been captured by the homosexual agenda, and it had no business getting involved in the cultural war.
Let me be clear that I have nothing against homosexuals or any other group promoting their agenda through normal democratic means, but persuading one's fellow citizens is one thing, and imposing one's views in absence of democratic majority will is something else.
Scalia did say in the years afterwards, if I can't make laws against behavior I consider immoral just because I consider it immoral, I can't run a legal system that makes any sense to me because law has to be based on social morality. Well, Lawrence, as it was written, took that particular social disapproval off the table. So once it's established that those relationships are equal in respectability to those between partners of the opposite sex, then the next question becomes, okay, what's your reason for saying we can't get married?
A brief history of gay marriage in the United States. 2 student activists, Richard Baker and James Michael McConnell, applied for a marriage license in Minnesota. They were denied by the clerk and by the court. But then in Colorado, a different clerk, Taylor Lorex, whose name is as unique as her place in history, did the unthinkable. A job. One of the couples that Taylor legally married is Richard Adams, an American, and Tony Sullivan, an Australian, like me. G'day. But even now legally married, Tony was denied a green card. The federal government claimed that they failed to establish that a bona fide marital relationship can exist between 2 faggots. And in response to that delightful letter, Tony and Richard filed the first lawsuit to seek federal recognition for same-sex marriage. They lost. And then the 90s happened. President Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, banning recognition of all same-sex marriage. Actually, he changed his mind. Granted, it would happen to be out of office for that thing. Beverly and Donut lived on under President Bush, as the states had a different opinion, leading the tribe to legalize gay marriage.
All marriages are non-equal. Despite the Defense of Marriage Act, courts in Massachusetts and Hawaii decide in favor of same-sex marriage cases, but there's a backlash. In 2004, 13 states across the country adopt same-sex marriage bans, including Oregon, Michigan, Kentucky, Utah, Louisiana, and Ohio.
So in 2011, it was our 18th year together as a couple. We had this tradition of getting rings for anniversaries. And it really started when we were together just 7 weeks. John gave me a diamond ring. Because he knew that we were together for good. I would say within the first 2 years of our relationship, we talked about marriage. You know, we had friends who were having commitment ceremonies. They weren't marriages. We wanted to get married. But we decided that for us, marriage has to be marriage. It can't just be this symbolic gesture. We want it to mean something legally. We wanted a level of government to say, you guys matter. You exist. We see you. But from the state level, we were being told we can never get married. And even if you were married legally in another state, and to show a marriage license, the state of Ohio could say, it means nothing to us. But John and I still were hopeful. January of 2011, I started to notice something different in the way John was walking. It just sounded different. It was like one foot was slapping the floor harder than the other. It's such a minor thing, just this change in the sound of the way someone walks. And it wasn't going away, and I finally convinced him, you know, something's up here. You really should go see the doctor.
Jim, I said, call me when you get the test results. And he said he would, and I didn't hear from him. So I called him, and Jim just started crying. He said, I'm so sorry to tell you this over the phone. I'm sorry to tell you, but it is ALS. And I just felt like somebody hit me in the chest with a baseball bat.
He was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. That was the start of it. Left foot moved into his left hand, and then his right side started to join in.
As John got sicker and sicker, Jim would just sit there and look at him and love him. He was with him every second.
So our days were filled with watching TV, holding hands, knowing the end was coming, but not knowing exactly when. So on June 26, 2013, I was working at the dining table, and John called me from his room and said, Jim, come in. So I went into his room, and he was watching the news.
The Supreme Court has just struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act.
Oh my God.
If you're married, you get a different level of benefits, usually higher. And you might get some tax breaks, like Edie Windsor. Without recognition of her marriage, she ended up having a $300,000 tax bill. If her marriage had been recognized, there'd be no tax. So she had a lot at stake financially.
When my beautiful baby died, I was overcome with grief. In the midst of my grief, I realized that the federal government was treating us as strangers.
This gets out to the Supreme Court, and the Defense of Marriage Act was struck down. So I read this, and I thought, this is huge. And I would like to give this marriage argument a real shot.
I'm standing next to John's bed, holding his hand. I leaned over, hugged and kissed John, and said, let's get married.
The phone rang, and it was Jim, and he said, what are you doing next week? And I said, why? What's happened?
You know, here we are living 6 blocks from our county courthouse. In a perfect world, I could have just taken John those 6 blocks in his wheelchair to get a marriage license, but not in Ohio. That really left us one choice, and that was a chartered medical jet. So we settled on Maryland. It was a quiet flight, few words, landed at BWI, and we parked on the tarmac.
Today is a momentous day, not only in the lives of two of the most loving and special men I have ever known, also in the lives of all who know, love, and respect them. And in the larger sense, for those Americans who have waited to be recognized as equal under the law and in matters of the heart.
It was a very short service, but I remember at the beginning of it, I said, would you two please take hands? And then I looked and I realized that they had never not been holding each other's hands.
And I was like, we got to do something we never thought we'd be able to do. Take each other's hands and say, I be one.
With the respect of the law of our great land, I now pronounce you husband and husband, forever intertwined partners. May love and goodwill be with you forever. Let us all rejoice.
I feel like you,
Just happy. That's all I can say.
It was a happy occasion. It was truly a happy occasion. And I've never been prouder to be an American than I was that day.
For John to take that ride, for him to do that was just the culmination of who they were, what they were as a couple, and what they've been to each other.
And being able to make those promises and commitments public and legal, everything changed. I think John and I use the word husband a few thousand times every day. Would you like something to drink, husband? Is the volume okay, husband? I love you, husband.
There it is. Well, that's not it. Where did it go?
I was at a picnic and we're talking about the issues of the day, including the Windsor decision. And somebody says, well, I have really good friends. They were so excited by the Windsor decision that they flew to the airport in Baltimore and they got married right there in the tarmac. And she says, it's all going to be in the paper on Sunday. It's Friday night. I said, well, that is exciting. I'm really happy for you. But
Yeah,
you know,
actually.
we got a problem.
So 5 days after we got married, Al came to our home.
I brought one piece of paper with me. I just brought a blank death certificate.
And he said, now guys, I'm sure you haven't talked about this because why would you be thinking about the death certificate?
Oh,
when you just
that's
got
what it
married?
is.
Do
Okay,
you
here we
understand
are.
when John dies? His last official
Where's
record
the
as a
left?
person will be wrong. Ohio will say he was unmarried, single, and Jim, your name won't either as his surviving spouse.
And they were
I
furious.
can
Then,
admit it pissed me off.
They wanted to know more. I mean, what would it take? We can do a copycat case. We can walk in the shoes of Windsor and just frame it the same way they framed that case. I can't guarantee a win. I can only guarantee my best efforts, but I'm liking the chances.
John, he thought it was the right thing to do, even though we both understood it meant I would be stepping away from John to devote some time to courtrooms, to meetings. To us, it was clear we had to do this. So John and I talked and very quickly said, yes, we're in. Count us in, let's do what we can.
So we filed like 3 days later. You have to understand that I'm a trial lawyer. I solve problems. My client's problem was that they weren't going to get an accurate death certificate. So that's all I need. Shouldn't be too big a deal. We're not trying to do anything flashy, sexy, weird, unusual here in little old Ohio. We're just trying to apply the Supreme Court precedent. And that's what we're doing. Is that all we're doing? No. But it was the first step.
Same-sex marriage is legal in Maryland, it's legal here.
So after we left court, a few hours later, I was back home with John and Aunt Judy was there.
And the phone rang and Jim hung up and
there we go. Okay.
we won. He said, it looks like we won. You know, it's something to see somebody celebrating the fact that his death certificate will be able to show that he's a married man.
It was a good day. One of the happiest moments towards the end of John's life. I'm confident. John got to live 3 months to the day after that decision. This one evening, I started reading one of his favorite books to him, Leaf World by Clive Barker. And over the next couple of hours, he just got quieter and quieter. And he went to sleep. And I still remember the last sentence I read. Lions become lions.
It was a beautiful love story, that's all there is to it. It was a beautiful love story before the illness, and it was a fantastic love story afterwards.
John died on October 22nd, 2013. And we applied for the death certificate. It came back with the right wording, and we got what we saw. But Ohio kept saying, you know, when we win this case on appeal, we're going to change all this back. We're going to honor what the people voted for when they banned same-sex marriage. So this case is hardly over.
Their fight is just getting started. Case Obergefell v. Hodges goes all the way to the Supreme Court. They're joined by couples across America fighting to have their marriages recognized by their state or to have their state's same-sex marriage bans overturned. This is big. This could be the 14th Amendment doing what it does best. Or will the Supreme Court deny this basic human right?
In January 2015, we got word that the Supreme Court said, yes, we will accept this case, and it will now be known as Obergefell v. Hodges.
And so the question was, does the 14th Amendment require states to permit same-sex couples to marry?
I needed to hear everything that was said.
We got there like at 7 o'clock in the morning. The whole atmosphere, there were the people that were there in support of gay rights. Then there were the people that were against it. It was really something to watch.
Once we got into the courtroom, we were seated over towards the side to the left of the bench.
They only allowed so many people in because it's not that big of a venue.
The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I don't know, I had this image of this enormous grand courtroom.
Then the justices come in.
The argument this morning in case number 14-556, Obergefell versus Hodges, and the consolidated cases.
One of my heroes is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's so small that when she sits behind the podium, only like from her neck up shows. But when she asks the question, there's no doubt that she's a very big person.
It did not change our idea about marriage. Marriage was a relationship with a dominant male who was subordinate female. Would that be a choice that the state should be allowed to have?
No.
Cling to marriage the way it once was?
No, absolutely. The justices are constantly stopping.
I don't think you answered my question, sorry.
Both sides.
This has anything to do with Article 4.
It's a constant give and take question and answer.
All Congress shall make no law respecting the free self
That's not,
It leaves this question.
it's really amazing to watch.
I was certainly there for the Obergefell argument, and I recall the lead counsel defending the laws against same-sex marriage. He is asked by Justice Kennedy, who's obviously everyone knows the important vote in this case, what about respect for the dignity of the couple? And the Solicitor General of Michigan says the state of Michigan has no interest in the dignity of the couple. And people around, including me, I have to say, around the courtroom, like, what?
Case is submitted.
So the oral arguments end, and, well, you don't really know when the court's going to announce a decision. So Jim was going to every decision day for 2 months.
Years ago, had anyone asked me, Jim, what's the 14th Amendment? I had no idea. My knowledge of the Constitution was pretty common to rattle off some of the amendments, for what, at least what they stood for, not necessarily the numbers, but I really didn't know the Constitution, and yet that amendment underpins this
Damn, I
decision.
did that wrong. Export as.
The Chief Justice says Justice Kennedy will lead the first decision.
Okay, I got transparency.
14,556.
So good.
Roosevelt versus Hodges.
I started with my chair and I took my pen's hands and thought, okay, here it comes.
The nature of injustice is that we may not always see it in our own times. The generations that wrote and ratified the Bill of Rights in the 14th Amendment did not presume to know the extent of freedoms involved
Custom
in these dimensions.
size.
And so, they entrusted to future generations a charter protecting the right of all persons to enjoy liberty, as we learned.
This is not.
Everyone knew the significance.
Start with a hat.
No union is more profound than which embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion,
Okay.
and family. In forming a marital union, two people become something greater than once they were. Some of the petitioners in these cases demonstrate marriage embodies
I
the
didn't
love
do
that made
foul
Jordan
yet.
ask. They would misunderstand these men and women to say they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their claim is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their immutable nature dictates that same-sex marriage is their only real path to this profound commitment. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants that.
I remember looking out and seeing the faces of these people, some of them openly weeping like children, tears running down their cheeks.
No one's hearted around something that profound.
It was one of the most amazing moments I've ever seen. I will tell my children, I will tell my grandchildren, that I was there when the court said, the door is open, you can walk through your full membership system.
My first thought was, John, I miss you. I wish you were here. I wish you could know we won. I wish you could experience this.
Okay.
And that emotion, that feeling was quickly followed by a surprising realization. It was the first time in my life as an gay man. I felt like an equal American.
We want to go back now to the Supreme Court that we see from the interns running out with the decision. The interns, here comes our intern now with the decision. Here it is. States will license a marriage between two people on the same
So I sat in that courtroom between my friends, knowing that word has gotten out to the crowd up front and that there's a party going on. People are celebrating, and all I can think is, come on, wrap this up, I want to know. Al and I are arm in arm leading our group, and the crowd just went before us. We would take a step and it would split further, and people were crying and cheering, singing, celebrating.
You get out in the front step, you've got all the protesters on both sides, you've got these amazing choirs singing, and that's like a totally discordant thing, because all the sounds happening at once, and all the media is crowding around him. Jim's talking to 25 microphones.
I want to thank my legal team, and especially Elle Gerhardt's side, who stood by me every single step of the way.
And then he gets a call from the president.
Mr. President,
While he's talking to the president, Vice President Biden goes to voice.
Not only have you been a great example for people, but you're an lasting change.
thank you.
I mean, it's just one of those moments that you just can't do a do-over on that if you don't want to.
It was an amazing experience to walk through that crowd and to feel the love.
The day ends in Cincinnati with gay couples getting married and the celebration.
I got to resize
And
this.
so, however, the Supreme Court of the United States of America will rejoice today in the power of love. You may seal your vows with a kiss.
And continued the next day with gay pride. I mean, how many cases end with a parade through the center of the city and everybody going absolutely nuts?
There were so many young people lining those streets, and they were looking at Jim and just quietly moving their lips. Thank you, thank you. I'm talking about hundreds of faces saying, this is the way it should be.
To go through this city that had changed so drastically, the most gay unfriendly city in the nation, to this wonderful welcoming place. I'll never forget that.
John would just say, John would think this was the most hilarious thing. If you told him that his medical condition somehow had led to a historic sea change in the United States legal system, he would probably give you that look.
You know, like, let me tell you, that kind of expression that I can see him saying, see, it really is all about love. That's what it's about, you know, like, to me. So, I think that's what he would say, and I think he would be just incredibly proud that his heritage was part of it.
Oh shit. Can I do this twice?
It was yet another lesson that conscientious attempts to apply the Constitution's rules to our national.
Okay, so that one is the answer. What do I call this one?
This is the heart of the 14th Amendment, the original.
No, this is the wrong name.
The rights that you must have as a person in order to be.
No, this one is the answer to the comment.
By recognizing this concept of the basic civil rights, the basic rights of humanity, you know, we move forward over 150 years and we're still figuring out what that means.
The 14th Amendment, many years ago, I could have told you one thing about it. Now I know the 14th Amendment, and I understand how that amendment is such an important tool in ensuring that we are treated equally and helps move us toward our American value of we the people and living up to those commitments. It's one of the most meaningful things. That's what drove me. I had to live up to my promises to John. I did this because I loved him, and love wins. Certainly did that day.
Oh, no. Let's see.
Marriage equality shows the 14th can be a beacon of inclusivity, a bridge to an America that honors the love we have for each other. Thanks in part to 14, the LGBTQ community has gone from being seen as a feared other to being treated
What is
as
this sound logo?
as living, breathing human beings who deserve equal rights. And in the same way, another group has been struggling for America to recognize their shared humanity. They too want 14 to be a bridge to the American dream. But instead, they hit a wall.
Wow. Export. courts.
So why here?
Transparency.
Why America?
Export.
My parents came to the United States, like many immigrants, in search of a better life. This was the land of opportunity. This was where an immigrant could find peace and build a family, build a home.
I was 10 years old when I came to America. For my parents, it represented peace, opportunity, and a bright future.
My parents chose America to ensure that I had the opportunities that they would not have been afforded living in Palestine. My parents chose America for the economy, for jobs, because I can be an unapologetic Muslim American woman in this country.
My parents brought me to the United States in search of better opportunities and specifically better education for me and my young brothers.
I grew up with my parents just loving this place. So I just grew up thinking I was the luckiest kid in the world because I had a chance to be here and I had the opportunity.
Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. Add my text.
To be born here.
So has America lived up to your expectations? 14th Amendment is a promise. Protection, equality, due process, and liberty. It says this is a country where anyone can build a better life for themselves and their families. It imagines an America that is capable of change and growth. And it's a promise to anyone on American soil, not just citizens. The authors of 14 chose a specific word, person. Everyone on U.S. soil has their basic rights covered. This word, person, is a reminder of our common humanity. We are all human beings deserving of empathy and dignity.
This is not working.
The 14th Amendment protects all persons under the jurisdiction of the United States.
Let's see if we
Guarantees the due
delete.
process of law and the equal protection of law. The amendment specifically uses the term person rather than citizen. And that's an important distinction because it means that those protections apply to everyone. Permanent residents, immigrants. Now that gap between who's a person and who's a legal citizen, that's been a huge area of debate, and that's part of the battle, right? Who counts in what way?
As we've seen time and time again, the gap between the words of 14 and what America delivers can be enormous. And that chasm between 14's promise and America's actions often feels like an insurmountable abyss to a certain group of people.
Immigrants are part and parcel of the United States. They do so many things for our country.
Immigration is one of the strengths of the United States. It's what helped build the country and brought youth to the country.
They're part of the fabric of this country. Our food, culture, our traditions.
Immigration brings talent, numbers, consumers, producers, and makes us a stronger country.
We are the people who make this country better because we want to be part of this promise.
Man.
If it wasn't this mix of cultures, it gives me great joy that we aren't all the same.
People come to the United States to become legal citizens. They basically pledge allegiance to the Constitution. The Constitution is the uniting factor in the United States. I think people who look in the mirror and see a patriot should realize that immigration is a whole bunch of people going, you're right. You have a damn good country. That's, what more praise could you ask for?
The founding fathers thought about citizenship. They
They're not thinking about including women, persons of color. It was a very narrow sense of who could be a fully entitled citizen of the United States. However, the Civil War, emancipation, and the 14th Amendment radically transformed the possibilities of inclusion for citizenship in the United States. The 14th Amendment's clause around birthright citizenship is absolutely pivotal in moving us from a white male settler nation into a future in which there was a possibility for diversity within our democracy.
This amendment which I have offered is simply declaratory of what I regard as the law of the land already, that every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States.
Our American mosaic of cultures and communities today owes a lot to the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship clause, which lays out that anyone born here belongs here. It's the most inclusive language possible. And it is such a radical idea that even 150 years later, people are still getting riled up about it.
Birthright citizenship.
Birthright citizenship.
Birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship.
Birthright citizenship.
Birthright citizenship was always a part of the
Come on,
Commonwealth. But
I
now,
wanted
Because
to
the 14th
go.
Amendment is very questionable. Does the 14th Amendment stretch to the position where anybody born in America is an American citizen? The text of the 14th Amendment is clear. We ought to change that policy.
That incentivizes illegal immigration.
It is the law of the land. It is in the Constitution.
Isn't the Anchor Baby law destructive to the country?
I think that cheapens American citizenship.
Hundreds of thousands of children born to illegal immigrants are made automatic citizens of the United States every year because of this crazy, lunatic policy that we can end. This debate cuts to the core of our deepest American anxieties. Who is America for? '14 is the first time our country truly grapples with the meaning of citizenship. It's written primarily to ensure Black Americans gain their rights after the Civil War. But before long, it challenges America's threshold for inclusion even further by covering immigrants. Not just the European immigrants arriving on Ellis Island, but also with a new group of immigrants arriving in the West.
Here it is, gentlemen. Pure California gold. You serve what we have. An epidemic hit the nation. Gold fever.
In 1848, gold is discovered in California, and the eyes of America turn to the West.
During the gold rush in California, Chinese immigrants first began immigrating into the United States in large numbers.
Meanwhile, the government teams up with titans of industry, deciding that they need the railroads to span the entire country so we can further expand the Industrial Revolution. They need workers to build those railroads, and the overwhelming majority of these workers are Chinese.
The role of Chinese immigrants in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad was the spark for our Industrial Revolution. And so the labor is key to the making of modern America.
The Chinese were coming into the United States to build homes here, to really establish lives here, just as every other group of people who would come into the United States from abroad was also intending to do.
Over the years, as the United States enters into a fiscal and economic crisis in the late 19th century, anti-Chinese sentiment rises.
As the economy gets worse,
Many Americans find a target for their fear and anger in the Chinese.
There was this idea that in this racial hierarchy in the United States, that they were a race that could not be assimilated into a white culture because they were just too different.
Now, you have people that are pushing the United States Congress to pass legislation to prohibit Chinese immigrants from entering the country.
By not employing them, you can drive them from the country. Awake, arise, your work begins anew. We will do with our bullets if our ballots fail. We will drive these new night lovers back by steamship and by sail. The Chinese must go.
The Chinese Massacre of 1871 was the product of years of rising anti-Chinese sentiment. It's one of the largest mass lynchings in the history of the United States. There was some kind of altercation, a policeman was called, the policeman called for backup. A white rancher showed up, chased somebody, got shot. And then a rumor started to spread that Chinese people were killing white people, and about 500 people showed up, and they surrounded Chinatown.
This fact says, 100 men are armed, firing at intervals and regular volleys are heard firing against Chinese houses at random and from rooftops. Sheriff and civil authorities have given up trying to restrain the mob. This will be a lesson to the Chinese not to resist the law officers.
The Chinese massacre is a stain on our history. Occurring just a few years after the 14th is ratified, it goes against the very promise of America. It is a horrible legacy that many of us don't even know happened or what happened next.
The Chinese Exclusion Act barred from entry all Chinese laborers, and it barred all Chinese, regardless of their occupation or status, from naturalized citizenship.
And that law was widely celebrated. People were glad to see our federal government actually taking immigration into its own reins. And not only are we going to have federal immigration law for the first time, but the purpose was an explicitly racist purpose.
The exclusion laws led to horrible things. It encouraged violence against Chinese. It separated families. It marginalized Chinese to menial jobs.
But this became a story of incredible resilience, where you see Chinese communities becoming incredibly organized, and they did everything in their power to—
Oh, the same way the black communities did. Picture that.
We are here to plead for the 150,000 Chinese residents of the United States whose liberties are threatened. They will be shipped like cattle out of their beloved homes from the country which they have been taught to love as their own, and dumped upon a foreign shore. This monstrous act astonished us. It more than astonished us. It is a measure too cruel, too inhuman, was so willingly and hastily adopted by the American Congress and signed by a Christian president in the United States, the land of liberty and home of the oppressed of all nations.
The Chinese sued that this violated their rights under the 14th Amendment, and they were very savvy about a legal strategy to push back against discriminatory legislation. Many of these cases were lost, but Wong Kim Ark and Equal v. Hopkins are the two cases where Chinese prevailed.
The equal principle says the equal protection clause covers non-citizens as well as citizens. If you are here, even if you are here illegally, they have to give you certain due process rights. You are entitled to a hearing. You are entitled to a process of appeals and to make your case that you ought to be allowed to stay. That's pretty remarkable.
And Wong Kim Ark establishes this principle of birthright citizenship.
The 14th Amendment really came at the right time to protect not only the rights of people who were formerly enslaved, it also was there to protect the rights of children of immigrants regardless of their race.
So the Chinese litigation was really important because it really.
All right. Thank you all for joining. I didn't talk much because I was concentrating, but hopefully you were able to gather some knowledge as we continue to make our season 3 merchandise. And as you can see, this is what I started with. I created all of this with AI. AI did not necessarily do the wording correctly on this particular one, but I did like everything else. So instead of deleting and starting over, I decided to do a little razzle dazzle, and this is what we have as the final product. Well, semi-final, because I'm going to go ahead and continue to make some changes and updates to this. So stay tuned to the merchandise when it drops. Thank you all for joining us in the Tech in the City podcast. Bye-bye.